We may have seen plenty of moves recently, but that hasn't stopped the off-season action from continuing last week, so it's time for me to bring you all another Overwatch League off-season news update, and just like last time, there will be timestamps in the description down below if you want to skip ahead to a specific news story. Today I want to start with the Houston Outlaws, who have announced the signings of Crimzo and Happy, as the team starts to add pieces around Dante. Starting with Crimzo, I think Houston have made a really strong pickup here, recruiting one of Dallas's few positive pieces from the 2020 campaign. Despite the chaotic season that Houston's rivals the Fuel had, Crimzo was one of their only consistent and reliable performers, with some very impressive displays at the flex support position. One thing that really stood out for me is that Crimzo seems to be a flex support player that has the ability to be proactive and sometimes even carry a teamfight, rather than just purely providing healing support on the backline, a quality that all the top tier players of this role possess. Moreover, he's a player who's seen continued improvement and development over the past couple of years, as he's transitioned from contenders to the Overwatch League, whilst also being the only 2019 Team Canada member that actually performed well at the last World Cup. Ironically, he's now the only member of that lineup to still be in the Overwatch League. Overall then, it's fair to say that I think the Outlaws have made a fantastic signing here, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do in 2021, under the coaching of Junkbuck and Harsher. As for Happy though, I think this is another brilliant signing from Houston that really gives me the impression that we're going to see a vastly improved Outlaws side next year. If there is one criticism about Happy, it is that he can be a bit inconsistent in his performances. Sometimes he's on fire, but there are other days when he comes out a bit cold. However, when he is feeling it, which appears to be more often than not, Happy is easily one of the best snipers in the Overwatch League, and showed that he could carry the charge to victory through his pop-off play alone. This superstar quality is what I believe was clearly lacking from Houston last season, aside from a few performances from Dante, and if Junkbuck and Harsher are able to extrapolate more regular top tier displays from Happy, then the DPS duo of Happy and Dante could wreak havoc in 2021, and this prospect alone should get Outlaws fans very excited. We've only confirmed 3 players so far for next year, but the Houston Outlaws are starting to put together a very interesting roster full of quality and potential. It's already looking far better than what they had in 2020. And whilst I believe they made a strong start, I'm now very curious to see whether they can continue this positive momentum, so I'm very intrigued to see who they decide to pick up next. The Toronto Defiance were another team that unveiled a couple of signings last week, with Michelle and Hisu joining the squad for 2021. I said in my last video that I expected Michelle to find a new team after being released from Seoul, but I didn't anticipate he'd find one so soon. I've seen some people really question and doubt this move, especially in regard to what a tank pairing of Sado and Michelle will look like on Toronto next year, but for me, I reckon it's one that will work. One of the things we need to remember is that although Michelle had a rough 2020 season, just a year earlier, for my money he was the Dynasty's best and most impactful player, and this was orchestrated under the coaching of KDG, the head coach he's now reunited with on Defiant. We saw last season that KDG was able to completely turn around Sado after his own disappointing year of displays, and there's no reason to believe he won't be able to do the same after bringing Michelle into the fold. If he can rekindle his old form, Michelle is a really good off-tank player, and should Sado and Michelle perform up to their potential, I actually think this is a really strong but under the radar tank line that could surprise many of us in 2021, and that's why I'd be cautiously optimistic about this pickup. The fact that they've brought in Hisu though, for me is far more significant, and really shows that Toronto are determined to improve upon their underwhelming 2020 finish. Personally, I thought Hisu was one of Philly's more dependable DPS players last season, despite all the high quality teammates around him, and the fact that he's now joined the Defiant from the Fusion clearly signals that he thoroughly enjoyed his time playing under KDG as his head coach. I'm curious to see how they decide to utilise Hisu and Logix at the DPS position, but if it ever is a double hit scan meta, then I think Toronto have themselves a pretty nasty pair here. After these 2 moves though, we now have our first look at a potential Defiant lineup, and I have to say that I like what I'm seeing so far. The only major missing link is a flex DPS player. There are certainly some really high level talents at this position currently available in the market, and if Toronto can pick one of them up, they could easily propel themselves from what looks to be a mid-table squad to a team that could be a genuine threat in 2021. So until they sign their flex DPS player, I'm going to withhold my judgment as to how well this team has developed this off-season, as although I think they're far stronger than they were in 2020, I still believe that they need to sign a superstar talent to really take them to the next level. With Hisu's departure from the Philadelphia Fusion, however, the team have wasted no time in bringing in his replacement, with the Fusion announcing they had signed Shockwave. On the Vancouver Titans, Shockwave had a breakout second half of the 2020 season. He was undoubtedly the team's best player, showing off his fantastic talent on a number of hitscan heroes, whilst also displaying one of the best echoes we've seen in the Overwatch League. In light of Hisu moving to Toronto, I reckon Shockwave should make for a strong replacement, and I'm excited to see how he performs on a far better roster, and particularly a significantly superior support line compared to what he had to work with last season. Just thinking about what he and Carpe could do in a double sniper meta just sounds a bit disgusting. An interesting point to note though is the wording in this announcement that Shockwave rounds out to the Philadelphia's DPS lineup. This suggests that they're not looking to recruit anyone else at the DPS position outside of Carpe, EQO and Shockwave, adding further credence to the idea that 9K is reducing the Korean influence on this roster for 2021 and making it more Western. And I'm intrigued to see if this approach works as the Fusion next season, if this is their plan, or whether it's an approach they may regret once the season finally gets underway. I want to now say a couple of sentences on the San Francisco Shock, who last week confirmed that 5 of their 2020 players have been re-signed for next season, and those players are Choi Hyobin, Striker, Smurf, Violet, and lastly Super. At the start of the off-season, when we discovered that Moth and Rascal would be leaving the Shock, I had to say that I began to wonder whether San Francisco would be looking at a significant regression in 2021, especially considering that many of their other players remained unsigned at that time. This past week, however, has all but dispelled any of these doubts, with the Shock keeping most of the core that has proved crucial in the team claiming their back-to-back Overwatch League titles. The fact that all of these players have re-signed, rather than moving on, really suggests that the team is taking the three-peat attempt seriously, and considering that their roster still includes some of the best players across every role, it is very likely that San Francisco will continue their dominance into next season. I'm now only wondering whether they plan to bring in anyone else, aside from FD God. But regardless, even if many of us were hoping for the Shock to decline next year, I think these re-signings make that highly unlikely, and right now, you'd probably still have to rate San Francisco as the #1 team in the Overwatch League. Before I head over to the APAC region, I just want to quickly mention that JMac has announced his retirement from playing competitive Overwatch. I know a lot of us memed his performance on London in 2020, but I think it is a shame to see him retire, as I do believe he had a lot of untapped potential that could have, like Saddle or Fearless, been revealed in a comeback season. Regardless though, like with any player who retires, I wish him all the best for the future, as he now looks to pursue a coaching career. But now looking at the APAC region, I want to begin with the Shanghai Dragons, who revealed that Molly would be joining the team from the Chengdu Hunters. Despite the Hunters having an up and down year in 2020, Molly proved to be one of the positives, displaying very impressive mechanics and fragging ability on flex support heroes like Ana and Zen. He's also quite an aggressive player, which seems to fit the playstyle that Shanghai want to run. And this is why in a Q&A, Coach Moon explained that although Molly in 1987 were at a similar skill level during tryouts, they thought Molly would better suit the Dragons' environment, and subsequently brought him on board. That said, I do now wonder how Moon will look to deploy Molly and Izzyaki at this position. So whilst I like the signing, and think Molly will enjoy being surrounded by a much stronger team, I'm interested to see whether he's just used as an impact sub, or whether Moon implements him as a regular starter. In some other Shanghai news though, the team also revealed they had mutually parted ways with Stand 1. It appears therefore that Moon wants to fully commit to Fate at the main tank position, and consequently Stand 1 was surplus to requirements, while Stand 1 was probably left to pursue more significant playing time. The 2020 season was a weird one for Stand 1, as it didn't start great, but by the end during the playoffs he was racking up some strong performances, and was even preferred on Orisa over Fearless. I would hope he's able to find a new team, but we'll have to wait and see. As for the Dragons, I think this decision to release Stand 1 now puts a lot of pressure on Fate's shoulders to perform at his highest level, and I worry that despite having a really talented DPS and support lineup for 2021, this main tank position will be what makes or breaks Shanghai next year, as they look to challenge for the championship. So it's definitely something I'll be keeping a close eye on when the season gets underway. As for Molly's former team, the Chengdu Hunters, they were the busiest side last week, having announced 3 new players who will be joining the team. The first of which is Farway 1987, who like Molly was someone who was involved in Shanghai's tryouts this off-season, before joining up with Chengdu. From what I've heard and seen, he's the best flex support player in Chinese contenders throughout 2020, winning Season 1 and finishing second in Season 2 with Team CC. And debatably, he was one of the best flex supports available in all of the Tier 2 scene this off-season, due to having a very impressive Baptiste, Ana and Zen, whilst also apparently being a strong shot caller. By Shanghai's own admission, Molly and Farway 1987 are relatively similar to one another in skill, so despite the Hunters losing a great talent in Molly, it seems they've more than made up for it by signing 1987. And given his great deal of promise and potential, I'm excited to see what he can do on the Overwatch League stage in 2021. Then there's Gaga, who's arguably the most exciting pickup of the 3 Chengdu made in the last few days. From what I know, he's been the most consistent and best main tank in Chinese contenders for the last year, dominating alongside 1987 as a member of Team CC also. RUI is assembling a roster that will hopefully be able to play the meta at a high level, while still having the adaptability to switch things up to their classic off-meta style. And as such, Gago will give some necessary quality depth and flexibility to Chengdu's main tank role alongside Anamo to allow them to pursue this approach, and that's why I think he's an excellent signing. Lastly, there's Nisha, a main support player who's seen plenty of success in Chinese contenders over the past 2 years. In 2019 he won 1 title, and otherwise consistently finished top 3 with T1W, and although he retired for a short while, he returned in 2020 with Billy Gaming, who he's achieved 2 further third place finishes with. Compared to the other 2 Hunters signings, I've not seen much of his play, but I've been told that he's a very solid main support player, and whilst he's not a flashy playmaker, he has a style more similar to Anamo, which could suit Chengdu next year. Looking at all these signings though, as well as the other roster changes the team has made in the run up to 2021, it appears that RUI has built up quite an exciting roster featuring the premier Chinese talents that have excelled in the contenders scene. For the first time, it looks like the Hunters will confidently be able to play meta compositions. But with the adaptability and flexibility still in place for them to revert to their older style, the Chengdu Hunters could prove to still be a real headache for teams next year, and as such I'm very excited to see what they can do when the Overwatch League gets underway. My only slight concern regards Vatal being a two-way player, but I need to wait and see how the Hunters look to utilise him further down the line. Quickly mentioning the Guangzhou charge, today they revealed that Damon and Neko will be joining the team's coaching staff ahead of next season. Both have enjoyed recent success with Element Mystic and O2 Blast respectively, and should be great assets to head coach Arachne as they hope to develop a 2021 charge roster that is full of potential. I'm admittedly a little saddened that Neko hasn't returned to the league as a player, but I'm looking forward to seeing how he does as a coach next year. To end this video however, I now need to address a piece of news that I purposely left to the end of this video, the Seoul Dynasty's announcement that Tobi will be leaving the team. If you've been following my content for a while now, you'll know that I'm a Seoul Dynasty fan, and that's because before the Overwatch League started, I was also a Lunatic High fan, so it's fair to say that I didn't take the news very well, because with Tobi's departure, Seoul has lost its last remaining remnant of the old Lunatic High roster. I felt a similar sadness last year when Jaehong left the side, but for so long, Tobi has been a consistent, unmovable player that has just managed to overcome any hurdle in his way, so it's a shock in the end that he's now actually gone. Over the past 3 seasons, the Boot God has retained the starting job despite challenges from Gambler, Jexay and Slime, and whilst I will admit he's not always enjoyed the best displays at the Overwatch League level compared to his time in Apex, I thought this season particularly he showed a tremendous level of improvement and development in terms of his play, and certainly contributed heavily towards the Dynasty's incredible 2020 playoff run, particularly in terms of veteran leadership. He's undoubtedly left an incredible legacy as a member of the Seoul Dynasty and Lunatic High, and will definitely be remembered fondly. I just hope he's able to find a new team for next season and isn't left unsigned, like so many of the other ex-Lunatic High members, because he's still good enough to play at the Overwatch League level, but we'll just have to wait and see. Cheering me up a bit though was the news last night that the Seoul Dynasty had signed Seoul and Anamo, 2 players I never thought I'd see playing for Seoul. Some were a little confused by the signing of SBB, but I think more than his playing ability, it was his experience and veteran leadership that really appealed to the Dynasty in light of Tobi's departure, so I'm looking forward to seeing the influence he can have on the team. Anamo, meanwhile, is a player that I think is seeing a more Marmite reaction. Some people love this move, whilst others completely hate it, and despair at the fact that Seoul chose him over Tobi and Slime. I can understand where both sides are coming from, as stylistically Anamo is definitely of more back foot main support, which in theory means that the Dynasty won't be able to play at a high tempo. But when thinking about it, is that actually a big problem? I've always thought the Seoul were naturally quite a slow and reactionary team, relying on picks from players like Prophet, Fitz or Gesture before engaging. So perhaps having a consistent and reliable main support that excels in this sort of system is a setup that will end up helping the Dynasty progress next season. In the end though, we won't get a clear idea till we actually see them on stage, but it's good to finally see Seoul make some moves this off-season, and although I'm still greatly saddened by the departure of Tobi, I'm cautiously optimistic about what's to come for this team in 2021. For now, that's everything I have in the way of Overwatch League off-season news, so if you have enjoyed the video then please be sure to leave a like and subscribe, or you can also follow me on my Twitter or my Discord, both linked down below. Till next time though, I want to say a big thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.